Let me ask you something uncomfortable. What if, the moment you died, someone opened up your chest, pulled out your heart, and placed it on a scale, and on the other side of that scale sat a feather, just a single feather? And if your heart was heavier than that feather, if it was weighed down by lies, cruelty, selfishness, it would be devoured by a monster and you'd cease to exist forever. No heaven, no hell, just nothing. That's not some medieval Christian nightmare. That's ancient Egypt. And the god standing there, holding that scale, watching every tremor of the balance with those intense, unblinking eyes, that's Anubis, the jackal-headed god of death, mummification, and the ultimate judgment. And here's what nobody tells you. Anubis might be the most psychologically sophisticated concept of the afterlife any ancient civilization ever created. I can't give you all the answers about Egyptian beliefs regarding death, because frankly, they changed over 3,000 years, contradicted themselves, and had regional variations we'll never fully untangle. But what I can show you is a pattern, a profound understanding of mortality that we've somehow lost in our modern, sanitized approach to death. So, buckle up, because we're going somewhere most people don't want to go. Into the tomb, into the darkness, into the reality that the Egyptians faced head-on while we run away from it. Picture this. It's sometime around 3000 BCE along the Nile. The desert sun is merciless. A body left exposed in this heat doesn't gently decay, it desiccates, shrivels, gets torn apart by scavengers. And what scavengers ruled the desert edges? Jackals and wild dogs. These creatures, with their golden brown fur and sharp, intelligent faces, haunted the necropolis, the cities of the dead. They dug up shallow graves, they scattered bones, they were intimately associated with death and corpses. Now, most cultures would see these scavengers and make them symbols of evil, of desecration. But the Egyptians, they did something brilliant. They said, what if we make the jackal the protector of the dead instead of the threat? What if we transform the thing we fear into the thing that guards us? That's Anubis. That's the birth of one of the most enduring divine images in human history. Anubis appears in some of the oldest Egyptian texts we have. In the pyramid texts, dating back 4,500 years, he's already there, already fully formed as the god who oversees mummification and protects the dead. His image is everywhere, standing guard at tomb entrances, painted on coffin lids, carved into temple walls. A man's body with a jackal's head, usually black, the color of the rich Nile soil, the color of regeneration, the color of the fertile mud from which new life springs. But here's where it gets interesting, where the mythology reveals something deeper. Anubis wasn't always the main death god. In the very earliest periods, that was Osiris. Wait, no, actually, before Osiris, there were other, more localized death deities. The mythology evolved, shifted, absorbed different traditions as Egypt unified and changed. At some point, the stories settled into a version where Osiris became the god of the dead, the judge and ruler of the afterlife. So where does that leave Anubis? This is the genius part. Anubis became the technician of death. He wasn't the judge. He was the one who prepared you for judgment. He was the embalmer, the guide, the psychopomp who led you through the terrifying landscape of the afterlife. He was procedure, ritual, the careful steps that had to be performed exactly right, or your soul wouldn't survive. Osiris ruled the realm of the dead, but Anubis got you there safely. Let me take you into an embalming chamber, because this is where Anubis's role becomes visceral, becomes real. When someone died in ancient Egypt, especially someone wealthy, their body was taken to a place the Greeks called the Per-Nefer, the House of Beauty. What a euphemism, right? Because what happened there was anything but beautiful by our standards. The embalmers, wearing Anubis masks during the ritual, would begin the 70-day process of mummification. First, they'd take a long bronze hook, insert it up through the nose, and pull out the brain piece by piece. The brain, which we now know is the seat of consciousness, personality, everything that makes us us, the Egyptians thought it was useless. They threw it away. The heart, though, the heart was everything. The heart stayed in the body because the heart was where you thought, where you felt, where your essential self resided. Then the embalmers would make an incision in the left side of the body and remove the internal organs, liver, lungs, stomach, intestines. These were preserved separately in canopic jars, each protected by a different deity. The body cavity was washed, packed with natron salt, left to dry for 40 days. Then the body was wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen, with amulets and prayers placed between the layers. Every step had to be done correctly, every word of power spoken properly, or the deceased wouldn't make it to the afterlife. And presiding over all of this, spiritually if not physically, was Anubis. The priests performing the ritual believed they were channeling his power, becoming his hands in the world of the living. This wasn't just practical preservation, this was sacred transformation, turning a corpse into a vessel capable of housing a soul eternally. But here's where the question nobody asks. Why did the Egyptians care so much about preserving the body? We're taught they believed in the afterlife, sure, but dig deeper. The Egyptian concept of the self wasn't simple. You weren't just one thing. You had your physical body, your ka, life force, your ba, personality that could move between worlds, your ak, transformed spirit, your name, your shadow. All these different aspects had to be preserved, protected, united for you to exist in the afterlife. The body was the anchor, the home base where all these elements could reunite. Without the body, or at least an image of it, a statue that could substitute, you were lost, scattered, unable to reform. That's existential terror right there. Not pain, not punishment, but dissolution, the ultimate non-existence. Now, let's talk about the weighing of the heart, because this is where Anubis reveals himself as something more than just a funerary god. This is where Egyptian religion becomes psychological, becomes about ethics, becomes about how you actually lived your life. Imagine you've died, you've been mummified, your tomb is sealed, your consciousness is navigating the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, which isn't under anything, by the way. It's more like a parallel dimension, a nighttime realm the sun passes through, full of demons, gods, gates, tests, and challenges. You've got the Book of the Dead, spells and maps written on papyrus or tomb walls, guiding you through this impossible geography. Finally, you reach the Hall of Ma'at, the Hall of Two Truths, and there stands Anubis, beside the scales. Your heart is placed on one side, on the other sits the feather of Ma'at, truth, justice, cosmic order, everything right and good distilled into something so light it barely registers. And here's the devastating beauty of this. Your heart has to be equally light. Not lighter, that would mean you lacked substance, lacked passion, lacked life. Equal, perfectly balanced. While the scale settles, you have to recite the negative confession, the list of sins you didn't commit. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not caused pain. I have not made anyone weep. I have not had sexual relations with a boy. 42 declarations, covering virtually every ethical violation the Egyptians could imagine. And you're not confessing sins, you're declaring your innocence. You're claiming you lived a good life. But your heart knows the truth. Your heart, which the Egyptians believed was conscious, which had witnessed everything you'd ever done, every cruelty, every lie, every moment of selfishness, it knows, and it can betray you. If it's heavy with wrongdoing, the scales tip, and waiting beside the scales is Amit, the devourer, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, the most dangerous animals in Egypt combined into one nightmare creature. She eats the hearts of the unworthy. You die a second death, permanent and absolute. Think about what this means. The Egyptians built their entire afterlife around the idea that ethics matter, that how you treat other people has cosmic consequences, that you can't cheat or bribe or talk your way out of moral accountability. Your heart, your innermost self, testifies against you. That's sophisticated. That's profound. That's honestly more ethically rigorous than a lot of modern religious systems where you can confess, repent, and get a clean slate, regardless of what you've actually done. And Anubis oversees all of it. Anubis, who sees everything, who cannot be fooled, who is absolutely impartial. There's something deeply comforting about that, isn't there? In a world full of corruption, injustice, powerful people getting away with terrible things, the Egyptians imagined a god who couldn't be corrupted, who judged fairly, whose scales never lied. But here's where it gets even more complex. Some scholars argue that Anubis's role changed over time. In the earliest periods, he might have been the sole judge. Then Osiris takes over that role, and Anubis becomes the assistant, the technical expert. Is this just mythology evolving, or does it reflect actual political and religious power struggles? Did different priesthoods compete for influence, and the mythology shifted to reflect their victories and defeats? We don't know for certain. What we do know is that Anubis never disappeared, never got demoted completely. Even when Osiris was the official lord of the afterlife, people still prayed to Anubis, still wore his amulets, still invoked his protection. Because Anubis was intimate with death in a way Osiris wasn't. Osiris died once, dramatically, and was resurrected as king of the dead. Anubis dealt with death every day, with every body, with every soul. He was the practical one, the hands-on one. Let me pull in something from way outside Egyptian mythology, medieval European alchemy. The alchemists were obsessed with transformation, with turning base metals into gold, yes, but more deeply with spiritual transformation, with purifying the self. And guess what? They used Egyptian symbolism constantly. They saw the mummification process as the ultimate alchemical work, taking something dead and corrupt and transforming it into something eternal and incorruptible. Anubis, in their interpretation, was the master alchemist. That connection isn't arbitrary. Both mummification and alchemy are about controlled death and rebirth. You have to destroy the old form completely to create the new one. You have to face decay, embrace it, work through it. You can't skip steps. You can't rush the process. And you need a guide who knows the way, who's walked this path countless times. That's Anubis. Here's something most people don't realize. Anubis had a cult, temples, priests dedicated specifically to him. The most famous was at Synopolis, which literally means city of dogs in Greek. People came from all over Egypt to pray to Anubis, to ask for protection for their dead, to seek his guidance. Dogs and jackals were sacred there, mummified when they died, buried with honor. Thousands of mummified dogs have been found at ancient Egyptian sites, offerings to Anubis. What does that tell us? That Anubis wasn't just an abstract theological concept. He was personal, immediate, someone you could have a relationship with. In a world where death was ever present, where infant mortality was high, where diseases we now cure easily were death sentences, where life expectancy was maybe 30 or 40 years if you were lucky, Anubis was the one who promised that death wasn't the end, that there was a process, a path, a way through. Fast forward to the Greco-Roman period. The Greeks encountered Anubis and tried to fit him into their system. They equated him with Hermes, their guide of souls. Makes sense, right? Both escort the dead, both know the secret paths, but it's not quite right. Hermes is a trickster, a thief, playful and unpredictable. Anubis is none of those things. Anubis is serious, solemn, absolutely reliable. The comparison shows how different Greek and Egyptian attitudes toward death really were. When Christianity spread through Egypt, Anubis slowly faded. The new religion had its own afterlife, its own judgments, its own guides and saints. But images of Anubis kept appearing, kept getting buried in tombs, kept being invoked. Old beliefs don't just vanish. They go underground, persist in folk practices, hide in symbols people don't quite remember the meaning of anymore.